In the last lesson, we discussed direct questions. This lesson is going to introduce you to indirect questions. So in English, these are going to be things like, I know what you did last summer. In which case, actually that should be a statement. That's it. I know what you did last summer. This part of the sentence, what you did last summer, is the indirect question. We could form that into a question, right? Starts with an interrogative. What did you do last summer? But here, I know what you did last summer. Or, he wondered what you did last summer. Again, another statement. So indirect questions are actually statements which contain a question inside them. I wonder where you're going. I know. I'm asking what you're doing right now. Those sorts of statements. So what we really want to focus on is how to form this indirect question, this question within a statement. And the basic format is going to be a head verb, dico, I say. I say what you're going to do. I told him why you were doing this. Skio, I know. Mirror, I wonder. Rogo, I ask. And so on. So we have a head verb, just like we would with an indirect statement. And then we have the same wording as the direct question, mostly, generally. All right, so we should say, generally, it's the same wording as the direct question. It's going to start with an interrogative, quid, quis, unde, and so on. But then the verb of the question, the verb of the indirect question, your original question, will be placed in the subjunctive. Now this leads to another whole can of worms, and that is the sequence of tenses. Now we have 4 tenses of the subjunctive, and all 4 tenses can be used in indirect questions. Up till now we've basically been using the present and imperfect subjunctive, but now all 4 can be used, and we'll outline each of these. So the situations in which you might use the different tenses is going to depend on the sentence of the main verb. So if your head verb is a primary tense, so let's focus on this column first. If your primary tense, or if your head verb is in a primary tense, that is the present, future, or future perfect, so I know, I will have known. So we're dealing here. And then the action of the indirect question takes place at the same time or after the head verb action. And for questions mainly the same time. So I know what you're doing. Or I wonder why you are here. So the action of the head verb and the action of the question are at the same time. Then the indirect question will be in the present subjunctive. So, for example, our sentence, I know, we're going to say, I know what you are doing. So, I know, present tense, main verb, primary tense, and what you are doing whatever you're doing at the same time as I am knowing, then this doing is going to be in the present subjunctive. Now, if we have a present tense main verb, I know, but the action of the indirect question took place before the head verb action, all right, so action before, so I know what you did, right, so I know, present tense, but you did something before I know it, then the indirect question verb, this did, will be in the perfect subjunctive. Here, this would be present subjunctive. This would be perfect subjunctive. Okay, moving on. If our main verb is in a secondary tense, our head verb, so I knew, it's a past tense, right? I knew is perfect or imperfect. And then the action of the indirect question is taking place at the same time. So I knew what you were doing, that verb is going to be in the imperfect subjunctive. So I knew what you were doing, imperfect. And finally, if our main verb is past tense, secondary, I knew, but the action of the question took place before the head verb action, I knew what you had done, then we're going to be using the pluperfect subjunctive. Now, there's one last note I should add here, and it's going to be hard to read this because I've written all over it, but it is possible to form and use a future subjunctive. So, in the example might be, I know what you will do. So that would be future. It is possible to form and use a future subjunctive for indirect questions, but they're not going to be covered in this lesson. Suffice it to say that they utilize a future participle and a form of sum, a subjunctive of sum. So we're still going to use the subjunctive. That subjunctive of sum will either be in the present or the imperfect, depending on the main verb, and then a future participle. But don't worry too much about such things. So, some examples. So a primary tense main verb and action happening at the same time. So scio quid agam. Main tense, main verb is primary tense, scio, and action taking place at the same time, present subjunctive. So scio quid agam. I know what I am doing. Or miror cur adsim. I wonder why I am here, why I am present. These actions are happening at the same time. We're going to use a present subjunctive. Or we could have a primary tense main verb, and the action has already been completed. Scio quid egerim. Remember, these are going to be then perfect subjunctive. So I know what I did. Or I wondered why, I wonder, present tense, why you were here, why you were present. And then we can have our main verb in the secondary tense, a past tense, so scivi amirata sum. If that's the case and the actions are happening at the same time, we're going to then use the imperfect subjunctive. So agerem or adesem. So I knew what I was doing. Or mirata sum, I wondered why I had been present, or why I was present. I wondered why I was there. So these actions are happening at the same time, but they're both happening in the past. And then finally we have our secondary main verb, scivi or mirata sum, both perfect. And then our action is already completed, so I knew what I had done. Or mirata sum cur ad fuises. I wondered why you had been present, why you had been there. Now, one little last note. What do we do if we run into yes, no, or double questions? And that is we're going to keep the exact same word order, generally, and just use the subjunctive. Now, a couple of exceptions to this. We can use num to equal ne. That is, num asks a yes-no question in this situation. So, miror num me audias. I wonder if you are listening to me, whether you are listening to me. So here we can use whether or even if. I wonder if you're listening to me. I wonder whether you're listening to me. The original question was me ne audis, but here we have our subjunctive, and we're just going to use num instead of this ne. You can, of course, use the ne. You could say miror me ne audias, but you don't have to. Num is an option. And then the other exception is if you want to ask a double question, and that double question was a yes or no, if the original question was, are you brave or not, unknown, instead of the unknown, more commonly you'll find nekne. So beware of the nekne. This is or not. So rogo fortis nesis nekne. I'm asking if you are brave or not. So the ne here introducing yes, no, nekne or not. So pay attention when you're dealing with indirect questions to the tense of the main verb and the tense of the subjunctive. These go hand in hand.